I smiled at him while the crowd cheered, unaware of the secret I quietly held in my hands. Cameras flashed, phones were raised, capturing his triumph, while I prepared the evidence that would destroy him tonight. The hall glittered with excitement, filled with executives and media, oblivious to the truth waiting behind the stage. He thought this night crowned him a king, completely blind to the storm about to unfold silently. My hands held the folder tightly, every breath measured, patience sharp, my calm hiding a lethal intent. And when the screen turned on, the illusion of his perfect life shattered before everyone's eyes. 2 days earlier, I discovered his betrayal wasn't just personal, it was a calculated plan to erase me. Emails meticulously drafted, calendar invites marked confidential, instructions to label me unstable, after his promotion revealed his strategy. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I waited, knowing the perfect moment would be my weapon of justice. For 10 years, I packed his lunches, worked double shifts, and endured silent dismissals without anyone noticing my sacrifices. When executives praised him, he smiled proudly, unaware the patience I held was quietly building a storm of truth. At home, his whispers of dead weight pierced the air, shaping my resolve for the perfect moment of reckoning. The night of his ceremony shimmered with crystal chandeliers, glasses clinking, applause filling the hall, while I walked unnoticed. The giant LED screen flickered behind the stage, casting shadows that hinted at the chaos about to erupt before everyone. He glanced at me, confident in his victory, completely blind to the storm I had been silently carrying for years. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that I was a working-class wife, invisible, married to a man chasing ambition. The higher he climbed, the smaller I became, overlooked, underestimated, silently preparing for a night that would change everything. I met him when failure still humbled ambition, when dreams were fragile, mistakes taught lessons, and love demanded patience. Every unpaid bill, every early morning, every silent night of endurance had been quietly shaping the power I now held. 2 days earlier, I wasn't snooping. I was backing up photos when I found a folder carelessly exposed on his device. Videos of hotel rooms, corporate lanyards still around his neck, her laughter echoing in frames I never should have seen. His voice warm, gentle, unfamiliar, memories of nights he whispered, dead weight, resurfaced, solidifying my determination to act strategically. Then I found the emails, precise, polished, instructions to destabilize me after the promotion, to protect his reputation over my existence. I realized I was a liability in his eyes, not a wife, and humiliation hardened into clarity and resolve. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above, champagne glasses clinked, executives chatted, cameras clicked, all unaware of the storm I carried. He squeezed my hand too tight, a warning disguised as affection, unaware the calm I displayed concealed lethal patience. The host announced the highlight reel. The room leaned forward, and I reached for my phone, fingers steady, heart controlled. Each clip cued, every email ready, proof undeniable, waiting for the perfect moment where silence would become justice. I pressed play, subtle footage first, him glancing, eyebrows raising slightly, trying to maintain control as whispers spread across the room. Next clip, her laughter in hotel rooms, corporate lanyards visible, him smiling at her, unaware I was orchestrating his public undoing. Flashback to nights of early mornings, packing lunches, staying awake while he chased ambition, unnoticed work now fueling strength. Email screenshots displayed, legal language, strategy to destabilize me publicly, limit exposure, protect brand, crystal clear to everyone now. Every reaction captured, executives whispering, journalists zooming, his confident demeanor crumbling frame by frame as reality hit hard. Security subtly approached him, not me. The unseen storm had shifted power completely into my hands. I remained calm, heart steady, the quietest voice in the room carrying the weight of 10 years of endurance. Every unpaid bill, every unseen effort, every silent sacrifice projected publicly, transforming invisibility into undeniable authority. He lunged for an explanation, stammered, tried to charm the board, but each attempt fell flat against truth projected flawlessly. The promotion vanished. Reputation shattered. He realized too late the depth of underestimation, the storm he had ignored for a decade. I sat quietly, sipping coffee later, letting the world see the patience, strategy, and dignity that had guided me all along. This wasn't revenge for cruelty. It was justice for endurance, visibility for the invisible work carried silently for years. Every glance, every shock in the room validated the quiet strength he never recognized, now visible for all to witness. Patience is not a weakness. Silence is not surrender. Dignity is never given by others. It is claimed by you. Sometimes healing begins when truth finally stands where lies once sat. Strength is quiet, patient, unstoppable. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in her place? Subscribe for more real-life stories every week. The applause didn't stop immediately. It fractured slowly, claps thinning as confusion spread across the room. I stayed seated, posture calm, breathing steady, while whispers slithered between rows like quiet sparks. He stood frozen near the podium, smile stiff, eyes darting, realizing control had begun slipping from his hands. Someone near the front coughed nervously. Another executive leaned back, crossing arms, already distancing themselves emotionally. The screen kept playing because once truth starts moving, it doesn't wait for permission anymore. A new clip appeared, time-stamped months earlier, showing hotel elevators and corporate badges swinging against his chest. I watched the board members' faces shift, not angry yet, but alert, calculating risk like seasoned predators. Power doesn't shout when it changes hands. It settles quietly, choosing a new owner without ceremony. 10 years earlier, we sat on a second-hand couch, counting coins, laughing about future promotions and loyalty. Back then, ambition sounded like teamwork, not escape plans whispered behind locked office doors. I remembered ironing his first interview shirt, fingers burned slightly, pride heavier than the cheap fabric. That memory tightened my chest, not with sadness, but with clarity sharpened by time and betrayal. Back in the hall, his phone buzzed repeatedly, ignored messages stacking like warnings he could no longer outrun. A journalist subtly adjusted her lens, sensing blood in the water, instinct honed by years of public collapse. He finally looked at me again, not confident now, but searching, pleading silently for damage control. I met his eyes evenly, not angry, not smiling, just present, grounded, finished with shrinking myself. The host cleared his throat, voice cracking slightly, professionalism struggling against unfolding corporate disaster. Technical issue, he attempted, but nobody believed screens that reveal too much truth accidentally. Security didn't rush. They observed first, because powerful institutions always measure before they move. I noticed that detail immediately, recognizing the shift from celebration to internal risk assessment. Another email filled the screen, highlighted phrases glowing softly. Mental instability, reputation protection, timing after promotion. Gasps finally escaped restraint, not loud, but sharp, slicing through the remaining pretense in the room. This wasn't infidelity anymore. It was strategy, documented, deliberate, impossible to dismiss as personal drama. I felt something unexpected then, not triumph, but relief, like setting down a weight carried far too long. Me, alone in the kitchen at midnight, rereading bills, calculating overtime hours while he slept peacefully upstairs. Me, explaining missed school events to our child, covering absence with tired smiles and practiced excuses. Me overhearing, "She doesn't understand my world," during a hushed phone call he thought I couldn't hear. Each moment stitched together now, forming armor rather than wounds. Back to the present, the CEO leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on knees, eyes narrowed with intent. That posture mattered. It meant evaluation had replaced celebration, consequences replacing applause. My husband opened his mouth, but no sound came out, confidence finally bankrupt in front of witnesses. I realized then he had rehearsed charm, not accountability, and tonight demanded the latter. A board member whispered to legal counsel. Another discreetly signaled to pause the feed. Too late. Truth doesn't rewind gracefully. It leaves permanent impressions, even after screens go dark. When the screen finally dimmed, silence crashed harder than any shouting ever could. Silence is terrifying when you're exposed, because it gives everyone space to think clearly. He turned fully toward me now, desperation visible, ego stripped, posture collapsing inward. I stood slowly, movements deliberate, not dramatic, aware every eye followed restraint more than chaos. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to, because credibility already stood beside me silently. I won't explain, I said evenly, because the evidence already has. That sentence cost me nothing, yet it took everything from him instantly. Security stepped closer to him then, not touching, just signaling containment and procedural consequence. I adjusted my jacket, feeling taller without changing height, lighter without apology. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I was concluding. As I walked toward the exit, murmurs followed, not judgmental now, but curious, almost respectful. I didn't look back, because closure doesn't require visual confirmation when truth has already landed. Outside, cool air hit my face, grounding me in the present moment after emotional turbulence. My hands trembled slightly then, not from fear, but from release long delayed. Flash gut. Signing my first independent bank account forms weeks earlier, just in case, just prepared. Saving copies quietly, labeling folders carefully, understanding patience as strategy, not weakness. Practicing calm responses in the mirror, rehearsing dignity instead of confrontation. Every step had led here, not impulsively, but intentionally, thoughtfully. I sat in my car for several minutes, breathing deeply, allowing adrenaline to settle naturally. This wasn't the end of pain, I knew that, but it was the end of erasure. Consequences would come slowly now, legal meetings, headlines, rewritten narratives he could no longer control. And I would finally be visible, not as collateral, but as the author of my own recovery. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. It clicks softly into place when preparation meets opportunity. And sometimes the strongest thing a woman can do is wait, watch, and choose her moment precisely. The next morning arrived without drama, sunlight spilling in like nothing extraordinary had happened overnight. My phone vibrated constantly on the kitchen counter, notifications stacking, names I didn't recognize anymore. I didn't answer immediately because urgency belongs to those losing control, not those reclaiming it. Coffee steamed quietly as I watched the city wake, realizing peace feels unfamiliar after prolonged tension. His first message was apologetic, carefully worded, sounding less like remorse and more like damage control. I panicked, he wrote. Things got misunderstood, as if truth ever misinterprets itself accidentally. I deleted it without replying, because explanations offered too late are usually negotiations in disguise. Silence again became my boundary, firm, intentional, no longer mistaken for weakness. Years earlier, he was standing in our doorway, apologizing softly after calling me unnecessary, promising improvement. Me accepting every apology, believing love required flexibility, not realizing it was slowly erasing my edges. That memory hardened something inside me, not bitter, just resolved. Growth often begins when patterns finally exhaust your patience completely. By noon, the news cycle caught fire, headlines spreading faster than truth ever did inside my marriage. Executive promotion halted amid scandal. One alert read, sterile words masking emotional wreckage underneath. Friends texted cautiously, unsure whether comfort or curiosity was more appropriate in moments like this. I answered selectively, protecting my energy the way I once protected his reputation. A lawyer called next, professional tone measured, explaining options I had quietly prepared for already. Preparedness is invisible until suddenly it looks like strength everyone pretends they expected from you. I scheduled the meeting calmly, feeling grounded instead of overwhelmed, a personal milestone I noticed silently. For once, life wasn't happening to me. It was unfolding with me. Late nights organizing receipts, scanning documents, telling myself I was just being responsible. Him laughing once, calling me paranoid, unaware paranoia and foresight look identical before disaster. That laughter echoed now, hollow, stripped of power by consequence. Sometimes mockery ages poorly when patience outlives arrogance. By evening, his calls turned frantic, voice messages piling up, tone cracking under accumulated panic. "I can fix this," he insisted, as if control could be restored with enough urgency. I didn't block him immediately. I wanted him to sit inside unanswered silence longer. Silence teaches faster lessons than confrontation ever could. When we finally spoke, days later, it wasn't emotional, dramatic, or loud like movies promise. We sat across from each other, distance measured, familiarity replaced by clarity neither of us could undo. He looked smaller somehow, not physically, but structurally, like authority had drained from his posture. Power loss changes how people occupy space. I noticed every detail quietly. "I never thought you'd do this," he said, revealing more than the accusation ever could. That sentence explained everything wrong with our marriage better than years of arguments. He believed endurance meant incapability, patience meant fear, silence meant ignorance. I corrected that assumption without raising my voice or justifying my choices. "I didn't do this to you," I said calmly. "I stopped protecting you from yourself." The room felt heavy then, realization settling where entitlement once lived comfortably. He had mistaken access for ownership, support for submission, love for invisibility. I stood up after that because nothing else needed to be said anymore. Packing a small bag quietly, choosing essentials only, leaving behind objects heavy with outdated meaning. Touching the doorframe once, grounding myself, acknowledging an ending without mourning it theatrically. Walking out without looking back, because backward glances invite doubt unnecessarily. Closure doesn't always feel emotional. Sometimes it feels administrative and clean. The weeks that followed were not glamorous, but they were honest and deeply stabilizing. Therapy appointments replaced crisis management, self-reflection replacing self-blame gradually. I learned how much space I had been shrinking to accommodate someone else's ambition. Reclaiming that space felt awkward at first, like stretching muscles long neglected. People asked if I felt guilty for exposing him publicly. I answered truthfully, "Guilt only exists when you've done something wrong." I told them accountability isn't cruelty, and consequences aren't revenge. Those uncomfortable with truth often prefer victims to remain quiet for convenience. One evening, alone again, I sat by the window, city lights blinking steadily. I realized I wasn't angry anymore, which surprised me more than anything else. Anger burns fast, clarity stays, builds, guides decisions forward responsibly. I felt calm, not victorious, not broken, just intact. Sometimes survival doesn't look like fighting back loudly. Sometimes it looks like preparation, patience, and choosing exactly when to stop enduring. 3 weeks after the ceremony, my name still trended quietly in places I never tried entering. Not because I spoke loudly afterward. He lost more than a promotion. He lost narrative control, which mattered far more to him. Former colleagues avoided his eyes, not out of loyalty to me, but fear of association. Power isolates faster than poverty ever could when exposure removes the mask permanently. I watched from a distance, not gloating, just observing consequences mature naturally. Flashgut. A memory of him coaching me once on how optics matter more than reality. Saying it casually, confidently, like advice meant to help me survive his world. That sentence returned now, ironic, sharp, finally instructive in an unexpected direction. Optics matter, yes, but truth decides which optics survive time. My lawyer confirmed what I already felt internally. I held leverage, not him. Documentation speaks louder than charm when institutions protect themselves aggressively. For the first time, professionals addressed me with respect, not pity or confusion. Being believed without over-explaining felt like oxygen returning after years underwater. He tried once more to regain footing, sending a long email framed as reflection. It contained regret without accountability, apology without ownership, fear without understanding. I recognized the pattern instantly. It was familiar emotional outsourcing disguised as growth. I archived it because emotional labor unpaid eventually turns into resentment. Friends asked why I wasn't angrier, louder, more publicly wounded. I told them anger requires energy I'd already invested too long elsewhere. Peace isn't passive, it's selective engagement after prolonged overextension. I had nothing left to prove to an audience already convinced. Me years earlier, explaining myself repeatedly, softening truths to avoid conflict escalation, shrinking sentences, swallowing reactions, mistaking survival for maturity. That version of me deserved protection too, not judgment or shame. I honored her by refusing to repeat the pattern again. The hardest part came quietly, not during exposure or confrontation. It came when no one was watching and life returned to ordinary rhythms. Healing isn't dramatic, it's learning to sit without anticipating disrespect. That adjustment took longer than the public fallout ever did. I moved apartments, not out of fear, but necessity for psychological reset. New walls, unfamiliar sounds, fresh routines disrupted old emotional reflexes productively. I slept deeper there, without bracing myself for tone shifts or silent contempt. Safety, I learned, is felt before it's defined intellectually. One afternoon, sorting paperwork, I found an old note he'd once written me. "Couldn't do this without you," it said, ink fading, intention already expired. I didn't cry reading it. Nostalgia loses power once patterns are fully visible. Sentiment without consistency is manipulation wearing a softer voice. Professionally, doors open slowly, cautiously, but genuinely this time. People respect those who withstand pressure without becoming erratic or vindictive. My restraint became credibility, something he once accused me of lacking. Irony arrived quietly, fully dressed, unapologetic. Flash gut. Him calling me dead weight, almost bored, as if stating logistical inconvenience. Me absorbing it silently, not realizing silence was being interpreted incorrectly. Silence is an agreement. Sometimes it's data collection. He misunderstood my quiet thoroughly and paid accordingly. I received one final message months later, short, stripped of arrogance. "I didn't know you were capable of this," he wrote simply. That sentence felt like confirmation, not insult, closure without conversation. Underestimation is only dangerous when paired with access. I blocked him after that, not ceremonially, just efficiently. Closure doesn't always arrive with emotion. Sometimes it arrives with boundaries. Life stabilized in ways I didn't know were possible before. Not perfect, but honest, and honesty sustains longer than illusion. I no longer introduce myself as someone's wife, supporter, or background force. I exist fully now, without performing resilience for approval. People don't clap for that, and that's exactly why it lasts. Quiet strength doesn't seek witnesses. It survives without them. The applause didn't end loudly. It thinned out slowly, like breath leaving a wounded room. People didn't rush toward me with questions or comfort. They avoided my eyes, unsure who deserved sympathy now. I stayed seated long after the screen went dark, feeling the weight of truth settle instead of explode. Power never feels dramatic once it's won. It feels lonely. I watched executives whisper into folded hands, journalists checking phones, assistants pretending not to stare. No one touched me, but everyone felt me, like a temperature shift nobody wanted to name. He didn't look at me again. Not in anger. Not an apology. In calculation. That hurt more than his collapse. Outside the ballroom, the air felt thinner, colder, like judgment had followed us into the hallway. Someone brushed past my shoulder and murmured, "That was a lot," as if truth had a volume limit. By morning, the story had changed shape. Not the facts, just the tone. Headlines didn't call it betrayal anymore. They called it a private matter that escalated publicly. People began asking softer questions, the kind that carry blame wrapped in concern. Did you really need to do it that way? Couldn't this have been handled quietly? Quietly. The word landed heavier than any insult. No one asked why he planned to erase me. They asked why I refused to disappear gracefully. At home, the silence felt different now, not oppressive but exposed, like walls without paint. He moved carefully, as if the space no longer belonged to him, yet still expected permission he hadn't earned. He slept on the couch without asking. I noticed he kept the lights off, like darkness might shrink the damage. On the third night, he finally spoke, his voice lower than I remembered, almost careful. "You didn't have to destroy everything," he said, not looking at me. I stared at the sink, the reflection of my face older, steadier, unfamiliar. "I didn't destroy anything," I replied calmly. "I stopped protecting it." He laughed once, bitter and sharp, then shook his head slowly. "They're calling me unstable now," he said, irony passing him without recognition. I felt something tighten in my chest, not guilt, not pity, recognition. That word had been rehearsed long before it reached his mouth. Friends stopped calling me brave. They started calling me strong in that cautious way people use when they mean dangerous. At the grocery store, a woman smiled too politely and asked if I was doing okay after everything. After everything meant after refusing to stay small. Nights became longer, not because I couldn't sleep, but because my mind kept replaying choices. Not regret, examination. I wondered how many women stayed quiet because the aftermath scared them more than the betrayal. How many truths died not from lies, but from the fear of being judged for telling them. He tried once to rewrite the story, sitting across from me like a negotiator, without leverage. "If you'd waited," he said softly, "I could have fixed it." Fixed. The world didn't clap when my life stabilized again. It simply moved on, leaving me with myself. And that was the real test, not surviving betrayal, but learning who I was without carrying someone else's weight. Mornings became slower. Not lazy, intentional. I stopped rushing through coffee, stopped checking my phone like a disaster waiting for my attention. For the first time in years, my body wasn't bracing for criticism disguised as conversation. People assumed healing meant happiness. They were wrong. Healing felt like honesty, without witnesses. It felt like choosing peace even when nobody applauded it. I learned how silence sounds when it isn't punishment. It hums instead of suffocates. Sometimes, late at night, doubt tried to return wearing old clothes. It asked whether I should have handled things more gracefully. But grace is not swallowing poison quietly. Grace is refusing to drink it at all. I didn't rebuild loudly. I didn't announce growth on social media or narrate resilience for approval. I simply stopped apologizing for being difficult when the truth was inconvenient. Work opportunities came differently now. Not through association. Not through borrowed credibility.
Through my own name.
And that felt unfamiliar at first, standing alone without shrinking behind someone else's shadow. But unfamiliar doesn't mean it's wrong. I met women who spoke softly, but carried steel in their choices. Women who nodded when I shared my story, not shocked, not impressed, just understanding. That's when I realized how common quiet endurance really is. One afternoon, I ran into him unexpectedly. Not at a ceremony. Not under lights at a grocery store. He looked smaller somehow. Not broken, diminished. We exchanged a polite nod. Nothing more.
No confrontation.
No closure speech. And I felt nothing. That was the moment I knew I had crossed the final threshold. Because indifference is not cruelty. It's completion. I walked away with my groceries, my shoulders light, my breath unguarded. The past didn't chase me anymore. Later that night, I thought about the woman I used to be. The one who believed love meant endurance without limits. I wished I could sit beside her and say this gently. You aren't weak. You are loyal in a world that rewards exploitation. And loyalty, when misused, teaches strength the hard way. I stopped framing my story as survival. Survival implies escape. This was a transformation. I didn't win by exposing him. I won by choosing myself without rage, without noise, without permission. Some people will always say I went too far. Let them. Those same people would have asked why I stayed if I had remained silent. There is no winning with those committed to comfort over truth. So I chose dignity instead. Now, when I speak, my voice doesn't tremble from fear of reaction. It pauses because I know I'm heard even when I'm quiet. That's power no ceremony can give. If you're listening to this while carrying someone else's ambition, someone else's reputation, someone else's comfort, pause. Ask yourself one honest question. Who would you become if you stopped disappearing? Because sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is let the truth stand where you used to stand smaller. And healing doesn't arrive when others understand you. It arrives when you stop needing them to. If you're walking through life feeling unseen, unheard, or quietly erased, listen closely. Patience is strength, but self-betrayal is not love. And silence is powerful only when it protects your peace, not someone else's lies. You don't owe anyone your disappearance to make their story easier to tell. You deserve a life where your presence is not negotiable. What would you have done in her place? Stayed quiet or chosen yourself? Tell me.
I'm listening.